Okay, good afternoon. Today we are very honored to have Professor Eric Friginal with us. Professor Eric Friginal is a professor and head of the Department of English and Communication at the Hong Kong Polytechnic University, where he also directs the Research Center in Professional Communication in English. Previously, he was a professor and director of international program at Georgia State University in the United States. His expertise includes applied linguistics, quantitative research, language policy, technology in language teaching, social linguistics, cross-cultural communication, and workplace discourse analysis. Do you think our ESP training should be adapted for learners based on the diverse cultural backgrounds?
In the areas that I study, because of my own personal background as well, I look at the role of culture and language in workplace communication. So with my background, and now that I am here in this part of Asia, and I see some parallels between Taiwan and Hong Kong as well, because of the many presence of multicultural individuals working here and using English in their workplace communication. It's really very important that we utilize more data-driven approaches. So for myself, I see culture, data, and the approach provided to me by corpus linguistics as something that will provide me with the right information. More general in looking at the traditional distinction between native speaker and non-native speaker communicators or interlocutors in a workplace, focusing primarily on English. So I can take a look at how that's influencing their communication. But then if I only look at non-native speakers of English, and then I look at their background, are they from here in Taiwan or are they from other countries as well, then I can further see some unique patterns in their communication. And that will help me in further going into what could be done to support them. They're also trying to explain what could be the reasons why they may have patterns that could be addressed or could be improved to make sure that they are communicating more effectively in their particular workplaces.
Following this, like for example, your research on call center discourse in the US, you have identified some critical linguistic pattern and challenges in customer-agent interaction. So what are the most common linguistic difficulty non-native English-speaking agents may face?
In the particular setting of call center communication, this is very interesting and also a very unique domain. It's customer service, so the callers are coming from a native English-speaking environment like the United States or the United Kingdom or other countries like Canada or Australia, and they are being supported by customer agents or call center agents who are based in other countries. So it's already very fascinating as an area of study, because there is a mismatch in what the customers may be expecting. In the traditional sense of customer service, for example, in the United States, they may expect the person who's assisting them or the individuals who are talking to them on the phone to be also based in America. That's the traditional thing, and then they may be expecting, in fact, that these are their neighbors or people around their city, or in a way, Americans or native speakers of English themselves. But given what's happening in the global nature of customer service, these services have been outsourced to other countries, and so the people actually who are assisting them don't necessarily have the same cultural background, language skills, and expectations. They also don't share time and space. They're probably supporting American callers in the middle of the night at their time, like 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. or something like that, for somebody calling in the afternoon or in the morning in the US. So there's already a lot of differences that this whole domain of call centers produced, and it's really interesting to find these linguistic patterns. And so I have over the years produced many of these distributions in terms of the data I shared with many of my students and people who have listened to my talks like today that politeness features, for example, is one example of how non-native speakers of English will have different ways of communicating with their customers. In the Philippines and India, they use a lot of these polite markers that in the United States, the callers may not be expecting immediately. So some of these features are good to show, and if we're able to show these distributions, we may be able to help the agents. Obviously, in this domain, the callers are not necessarily people we intend to help, because they are the customers. We don't have access to them, but maybe we can help them by showing that they are communicating with people from overseas, again based in India or the Philippines. Then they should also be aware of some nuances in how these individuals will be communicating with them, not just the accent, but also use of words, use of devices that will help them facilitate the transfer of information.
I suppose this is an ESP domain environment. Do you think this kind of knowledge or pattern should be taught to ESP trainer to improve fluency or strategic language use and so on?
That is one of the goals that I see in conducting this. English for specific purposes is to be naturally aligned with corpus data. And in fact, that's why I see corpus linguists should connect more directly with ESP practitioners. I feel like in the field of ESP, we wanted to really show real world use of language. So who are the speakers? What's the context of communication? What are the norms in the communication process? And how do we best improve communication by showing people what happens when language happens in the communication, right? So for example, what are good features of successful communication or miscommunication as well? What will be the features of miscommunication in a context like this, so that we can train ESP practitioners about what to prioritize in their teaching and learning, what to critically evaluate, and how they could utilize these patterns in the materials that they create in the teaching of ESP for across different kinds of domains, not just with call centers or aviation, but also business communication, even language teaching and learning, government settings where we have politicians who are traveling abroad and communicating with other government officials. Those are things that are very important for ESP trainers to learn and get data, and so that they will be helping in informing their materials design and teaching in the classroom.
So for workplace interaction, many industries such as call center and aviation communication, they may rely on the scripted communication to ensure consistency and efficiency. But when they go to work, real world communication requires adaptability. So how should ESP training strike a balance between scripted and spontaneous speech to best prepare learners for
That's
the workplace?
a very, very good question. The notion of spontaneity in language and then what they have memorized or trained. However, the two domains that I study, and particularly with your question today, they're also very unique in a sense that they have been relying on what you have said, a scripted communication. Let me start with aviation. Aviation has its own prescribed standard phraseology. And so people are required to learn about these terms. They have to memorize it. They have to obviously clearly identify the right way of explaining what's happening, the right way of asking a question, and that members of this communicative domain, the interlocutors, the interactants, actually are expected to know all of these things. So the air traffic controllers and the pilots, for example, are both aware of the expected phraseology. So we call it standard phraseology. So in the training for this domain, the idea is that as much as possible, they should stick to this domain, because safety is an important component, being direct, being very specific, being very, very particular to the issue. will help solve problems, will help solve potential issues and avoid miscommunication, right? So in aviation, the default is they have to learn the scripts. However, we have also understood that in aviation, there are ways or communication domains or contexts where phraseology itself will not be enough. So we call it plain English. So the idea that there's also a need to speak in plain English is very important. That phraseology alone will not be able to cover all of the needs, all of the emergency issues, because the plain language is also very important. So in this domain, for a pilot and a controller to both be skilled in phraseology and then in plain language or plain English will be equally important. Beyond the plain English requirement, if things are becoming more informal, so for example, telling a joke will likely not be important in this domain. Maybe good in establishing rapport or communicating with friendliness, but in reality, they don't need it. I mean, they can be friendly or humorous later on outside of the business or serious or work-oriented kind of discussion if they're flying or landing a plane, right? But in reality, scripts are very, very important. On the other side, for customer service, there's also this component of the kinds of questions that the agent need to ask depending on what the role is or what the task is about. If I, for example, were an agent and I'm supporting a caller who is asking for me to help troubleshoot an iPad that's not working or a computer that's not running well, then the agent will have to have the skill in describing technical language, in making sure that the caller knows how to properly follow the instruction, because the caller might not have technical understanding of some of the terms. So the agent should know how to best explain it to the level of comprehension that the caller may have. So it's a little bit different when it comes to business communication. Because the customer service and aviation both have the standard scripts, if you may, but there still will have to be a way to clearly balance everything and make sure that the agent on this area is and the controller or the pilot will be able to fully understand what to do next if there's a potential miscommunication.
So in that case, do you think that these call center agent and pilots are actually capable of switching their way of speaking if they're talking to controller or they're talking to ordinary people?
I think there could be a way. I think successful communicators will be able to be trained so that they will easily adjust to what's happening, what's going on. Both will have very important aspects to accomplish. In terms of pilot and controller, they have a very, very important thing to do, which is land the plane with no problem. Hopefully no accidents, obviously, that's very, very important. In the call center world, hopefully address the concerns of the caller. Make sure that the caller was happy with the support, and make sure that if the agent is delivering a negative message, for example, the agent won't be able to support the caller, that the caller will still understand and will actually, for the purposes of the company, will not be mad at the company if the agent was successfully able to present the case that he or she already did what has to be done or what's needed to be done. Then maybe you're looking at the customer understanding that the support was there. Some of the conflicts that happen in customer service when people get angry, you have callers complaining about bad service, difficulty in understanding the agent. All of those things I hope could be addressed by training. And the trainee will be putting enough attention into learning what could be done. Again, obviously, for many of them, language barrier is an issue because English is not their first language. Then there might be some major problem beyond training. But if not, if training could be addressed, then I hope that these interlocutors will be able to find a way to communicate effectively.
Okay. Prosody, intonation, stress, rhythm, and phonetic features important in these two fields?
Very, very important because see, prosody and segmental and suprasegmental pronunciation, very, very important in that they show beyond meaning. Obviously, meaning is already included there, but beyond meaning, the affect of talking is also there. So the ability for someone to show the actual message, whether it's anger, patience, friendliness, or urgency, could be captured by the right way of pronouncing something, whether it's a word or it's a sentence or it's a clause. So very important that we train the speakers. And again, in our context, if these speakers are using English as their second language, so they may have some problems. So the difficult thing that we say accent is something that's very important. There are two components that we have to watch out for when it comes to accent. Accent that some native speakers or English first language speakers might not positively respond to, meaning there could be already like this whole judgment about the accent that the speakers themselves will have, and so we need to kind of like focus on that and see what we could do. I don't necessarily agree with the practice of many of these companies. In fact, in India and the Philippines, they have training that they referred to as accent neutralization. Neutralize an accent in order for the speaker to not sound too Indian or too Filipino in their speech. This is done through pronunciation training, practice, and drills. Some people could actually be trained and memorize and pronounce things properly, and then have really solid intonation, stress, and rhythm that may sound really fluent when it comes to the kind of English variety that they have. I don't necessarily see this as an important component, because in the field of sociolinguistics, we see this as not productive, because see, we're more addressing the affect or the potential judgment some people may have about second language English. I feel like that has to be celebrated, fully appreciated, that somebody with an English accent is maintaining his or her own unique diversity in communicating in English, right? In fact, even in the native English-speaking world, there are many variations, there are many accents. So my own disagreement is just because I also value sociolinguistic variation, just the acceptance that we speak and use English differently. And that's something that we have to respect and hopefully all eventually celebrate if we're able to communicate well and understand each other anyhow.
I believe corpus linguistic skills, the pattern that we find, and the empirical knowledge that we have could contribute to ESP training and help learner to learn the diversity of cultural differences. One final question maybe, what do you think of this whole training in bilingual education? Either it's in Hong Kong or in Taiwan. What is your view on this?
I am very much impressed by what many universities here in Taiwan and also in Hong Kong are focusing on when it comes to bilingual education. I feel like both universities and many governments in the areas here are having a clear goal in terms of what they wanted to accomplish, and also being realistic because of the role of the national and local languages, and then at the same time English as a lingua franca for international communication. So there is this reality orientation to it that recognizes that it's also needed at this point. So in many major universities in Taiwan, for example, English is an important component. We have many universities, just like your department and unit here, focusing on EMI, that obviously identifies the need to train students getting into the workforce to learn how to best communicate in English. So I'm looking at all of these programs as very current, and at the same time preparing the students for future employment in a more global setting. Obviously, Taiwan is oriented towards global communication and global industries, so that's a natural progression. However, I feel that it's also now time. I mentioned the term English as a lingua franca, and in bilingual education, I feel like we have to already start really reflecting on how we define and looked at native English variety. And if we were to have a bilingual education program, how we define the goal of fluency. Are we targeting fluency as near native or native-like fluency, or are we willing to re-establish a clear variety of English as spoken by people in Taiwan, or people in Hong Kong, or people in Singapore? You know, so the whole idea of removing judgment if your English is not American English, if I may say that, or if your English is not British English, for example, of if we're pronouncing words differently compared to the native English speakers. I feel like if we start looking at both ESP purposes, EMI purposes, and English as a lingua franca as an important component, we are looking at justifying the variety that we speak. Accuracy should still be there. I mean, we can still focus on grammatical rules and as much as possible understandable pronunciation, but we're also open to recognizing some regional nuances and variation, you know, accepting that, you know, oh, in Malaysia, this is our kind of English that we speak, or in the Philippines, this kind of English is fine. We use these words, and they're not necessarily words that an English speaker from the United States will use, but it's something we understand. So avoiding the judgment in the perceived fluency or quality of the English that is representative of one particular variety of English is so important. In the process, I'm a big proponent of different varieties. So if you are thinking about global Englishes, as many people will define them, or world Englishes as another area of study, I feel like as long as we're highlighting the existence of these varieties, that they are equal to each other, and we are not driven by a standard native speaking or native speaker ideology, then I feel like we are recognizing the unique emerging or emerged variety of English in one particular location or setting. So I hope that that is doable. I know that that's not the traditional notion that we have. In fact, I believe that in many of our places, like in Southeast Asia or in Taiwan and Hong Kong, where people and parents are still thinking that having their children speak a certain high quality English is an indication of success. That's still there. And again, for those who are looking at sending their children to the United States or the UK for studying English and other areas, that can be done, and there's nothing wrong with that. However, I feel like that should not be the standard, you know, because English in Taiwan on its own is can be sustainable and can actually represent and serve Taiwanese people more effectively without any judgment. That is good quality language, and that's language that the kids here will be able to represent and use to represent themselves in global communication.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. In terms of the EMI at the university, our goal is to use English in the ordinary classroom in different subjects. So we are talking about effective communication, effective delivering of knowledge and exchange of knowledge.
Yeah.
But of course, if you talk about students' ability, we do need to consider if a certain kind of variation should be taken into consideration.
Right.
Thank you so much for the interview and the perspective on ESP and corpus linguistics. And thank you for listening to this interview.